The numbers from the bakery. There's a New York Times story on healthcare. There's two or three of these stories today. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, all about what's coming in 2014. I have to say, as an aside, everybody in the news business writing these stories knew 3 years ago this was going to happen. They're writing these stories as though this is newly discovered information. But everybody knew. I mean, because there were debates about this. I mean, within the media. I know there's some ignorance and some willing blindness in the media. But for the most part, with exceptions, they knew everything in this healthcare plan that was reason to oppose it. They knew it. So all these stories that are appearing, like today, there's a bunch of them, on all the surprises coming in Obamacare. They knew. Such as, you realize that companies, with fewer than 50 employees, or with employees who work 30 hours a week or less, don't have to provide health insurance for their employees. Did you know that? This has been known since before the bill was signed into law. It has been known certainly since the bill was signed into law. Trades knew it, businesses knew it, health insurance companies knew it, the media knew it, everybody knew it. It's just being reported today as though it's been discovered just today or yesterday. So the stories are appearing. And on the insurance side, there's a Wall Street Journal story and another publication about how premiums are going to go up anywhere from 20 to 100% next year, starting in January. The New York Times has a story about a bakery that, after Obamacare fully implements, will eat up over half of its profit. Just a single bakery. And here are the numbers of this bakery in the New York Times story. The premiums to cover their employees will cost $108,000 more a year than what they're paying now. Stop and think of that. $108,000 additional dollars they've got to come up with in January to comply with Obamacare. Their profit, according to the New York Times, the bakery profit is $200,000 a year. So on one hand, what they make every year on average, a couple $100,000, starting in January, their health care insurance costs go up $108,000, so over half of their profit gone to comply with Obamacare. Now, they could opt to pay the fine. It's a little different for individuals choosing to pay the fine. If you're not covered by an employer plan, your fine will be much less than the price of a policy. But that isn't true for a business because they have a lot of employees, and if they choose to pay the fines for each employee instead of coverage, it still adds up. In the case of this bakery in the New York Times, if they opted to go the fine route, $130,000 additional dollars, which is even worse. Or the third option that they have is to fire a number of employees to get below the 50 employee threshold, and in so doing, maintain their profit and keep their business. So there's three options this bakery has that wouldn't exist were it not for Obamacare. Obamacare full implementation means this bakery can't stay in business for very long. Not when its profit is $200,000. Its health care expenses are an additional $108,000, or a fine for not providing the coverage is $130,000. Third option, fire a bunch of people, get under the 50 employee limit, and not be subject to Obamacare. What do you think they're going to do? My guess is they're going to choose door number 3. And you know what? They're going to hate it. Because contrary to what most people think, most businesses do not hate their employees, particularly small businesses. Most small businesses really appreciate their employees. Small businesses couldn't get by without them. There is no free time in a small business. But they're probably going to choose door number 3 because that door keeps them in business. But they're going to lay off a lot of people. They're going to cause economic distress for a lot of mandate, people. None of it would happen were it not for Obamacare. And I'm sure the people at the bakery, having convinced the New York Times the truth of this, will tell their employees the truth. And the employees of this bakery will know that it's not the bakery laying them off. It's not the bakery being a bunch of cheapskates. It's the federal government and its mandate in this entitlement that's making it cost prohibitive to stay in business. And in the process, what's going to end up being proved here is that the purpose of a business is not to provide jobs and health care for people, contrary to what many low-information voters believe. The purpose of a business is to provide people jobs and health care. No, it's not. And this instance is going to prove it. The bakery now has 95 employees. They would have to fire almost half of their employees to get under the 50 employee threshold. So now the question becomes, will they even be able to stay in business with just half of their workforce? Will they be able to maintain the same level of business? Will they be able to bake as much, produce as much, output as much if they get rid of over half of their workforce, or about half their workforce? So even if they do that, their business is going to shrink, and then the profit is going to shrink because their sales are going to shrink. Now, what's most amazing about this is the New York Times tells the truth about this situation. This is not a story ripping the bakery, the ownership, management, none of that. It's not sympathetic either, but it is pretty much informative. And this is what's in store for so many businesses. And as I say, the New York Times knew this 3 years ago. Everybody reporting this story today knew that this was coming. But they didn't dare tell anybody before an election. They didn't dare tell anybody during the time health care was being debated. They didn't dare put this information. And people who made these claims, people who had read Obamacare and were trying to tell people that this was what's in the bill, were called scaremongers and extremists and people that just had it in for Obama, and no matter what he does, they're not going to agree with it, that kind of take. So the people that were telling people the truth about this or reporting it were impugned and criticized and ridiculed. In fact, it was even worse. They were selling Obamacare as a way to save small business, because that's what Obama was doing. Obama was saying it's going to lower the deficit. It's going to expand health insurance and treatment. It's going to lower costs. It's going to bring down the deficit. None of it was true. And everybody that was passing on what Obama was saying knew what he was saying wasn't true. But since their job any longer is not to be suspicious or questioning of what people in power say, it's simply to convey it, we're going to come to January of next year, and there is going to be a literal explosion from people who have no clue any of this is coming. And when it hits, they're not going to know who to blame. They're going to blame the business probably, or they're going to blame the insurance company. Sure, you know that's going to happen. You know the insurance company is going to take the main hit on that. And the media will be right in there promoting that, even though they're today reporting the insurance companies have no choice. So Obamacare sold as a way to save small business, lower the deficit. None of it was true. Plus, folks, it's going to be so complicated and so inexplicable that it may well be, and I'm not predicting this, that it may well be that this thing is so complicated, so filled with dead weight, it may be bureaucratically impossible to fully implement this thing. Let me ask you a question. I watched a fascinating show the other night. The BBC produced a 90-minute docudrama, I think it starred William Hurt, about the Presidential Commission investigating the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger. And it was fascinating. There was nothing in it that we don't now know. But the program has not aired in this country. There was an attempt to cover up what really happened. And to boil it down to its essence, there was testing data that said do not launch below 40 degrees or 50 degrees, whatever it was 32 or 28 when they launched. Do not launch because the O-rings in the solid rocket boosters become brittle. They will not expand to fill gaps as the material in the solid rocket boosters expand. The gaps will not be filled. Gases, so forth, and an explosion will happen. There were people at Morton Thiokol who had told NASA this, but NASA had convinced the government to drop the Air Force from launching spy satellites. NASA said, we'll do it for you. You pay us. This will justify the shuttle program, and we'll guarantee you. They did 2 launches a month, and we'll get all your secret spy satellites up there. And what happened was, the reason they tried to cover it up was, remember, this is the middle of Cold War. They didn't dare want to admit to the Soviets that we couldn't launch anything. We couldn't launch a rocket of any kind below 40 degrees. They just couldn't have that information came out. Well, anyway, it was brought out. It did get brought out during public hearings thanks to a physicist named Richard Feynman. And he is the lead character in the docudrama. Now, I just took the time to explain what it's about. It's not relevant to what I'm talking about. At one point, Feynman and an Air Force general ally of his, who's trying to steer him to the truth, he's also under commission, but he can't say so because his source for the O-ring problem was Sally Ride, the astronaut, but she had to be protected too. So they were desperately trying to get Feynman steered into the right direction. They knew what the problem was, but they needed an independent member of the commission to find it, make it public. So they take him to the Pentagon, and something struck me. I don't know why, but they're driving into the Pentagon, massive building, and I started asking myself, I wonder if there's one person who knows everything going on in the Pentagon at any given moment. And I said to myself, that's not possible. The Pentagon's a Department of Defense, but there's not one person who knows everything going on in there. Now, I don't mean that rogue things are going on in there. I mean, there's so much happening. All the military branches are in there. All the secret stuff is in there. All kind of, there are 5 different rings, all kinds of different levels of security. It's impossible for any one, even the Secretary of Defense does not know. I once asked a former CIA director, does the director of Central Intelligence know everything going on in the CIA? He said, no way. Well, my point is, I'm telling you, this Obamacare is so massive, there isn't going to be one person who'll be able to tell you what should happen and what shouldn't happen, what's legal and what isn't legal. It's too massive. It's too complicated. It leaves too much. There are already 800 new pages of regulations that got written in one day a couple of weeks ago. That's how open-ended this is. There's nobody that can really tell you how this is going to manifest itself. And my point is, it's going to end up being so big and so unwieldy that it may be impossible to fully implement. But the danger there is, in that circumstance, then some out-of-control bureaucrat can just do anything with it, which is the problem, one of many, of letting the federal government have control over something like this. Now, the free market is the best place to take care of this, but it's been aced out. So I'm telling you, folks, there's going to be hell to pay starting next January in ways that we cannot even imagine.